Do plants have memory? That's the question I always wondered while playing with one of my favorite plants, the Mimosa pudica, also known as shy plant. The name derives from its very peculiar characteristic. When you touch their leaves, they seem to quickly retract, like very fast, as a defensive mechanism. I mean, this by itself is quite awesome, right? I mean, when we think of plants, we don't think of them as moving organisms per se. I mean, you've seen maybe a time lapse of bamboo growing or maybe a bean sprout going around a trellis, but nothing like you can actually see it by yourself with your naked eye. Well, this plant completely breaks this intuition that we develop. And at least for me, it always makes me wonder if it can move like an animal, meaning it can react like an animal, can it also have other animal-like characteristics that maybe we have not really explored? Could this plant actually have memory? This is what I decided to investigate in this video. But before starting, it's important to actually grow the plants, so let's start with that. To grow the plants, I started by soaking some seeds in water for about 2 days, just until they are nicely swollen up. After that, I planted them in soil and gave them a generous amount of water. And yes, I used old yogurt containers as pots. I really didn't feel like buying new plastic just for this, so it is what it is. I then moved everything into my grow tent, where the seeds could stay warm and hopefully get off to a good start. About a week later, the first seedling emerged and quickly developed its first true leaf, even capable of moving. After that, most of the seeds followed. The last 2 were a bit slower and took about 2 weeks to emerge, but they eventually caught up, so no one was really left behind. Then I noticed the leaves starting to yellow, which made me think the soil was a bit depleted of nitrogen. For this, I decided to use a slow-release fertilizer, and after incorporating it well into the soil, the plants really started taking off. Once the highly responsive big leaves started to develop, I finally felt ready to start doing some experiments. Before starting our experiments, it's important to understand what memory actually is. So, what is memory? Memory is classically defined as the cognitive faculty that allows an organism to encode, store, and retrieve information from past experiences. To make this simpler, let's look into this example. A guy is walking around and falls on a banana peel. Kinda embarrassing, but he gets back up. He then sees another banana peel and again falls on the ground. This shows a lack of learning and memory. In a different case, instead of slipping on the banana a second time, he goes around it. This shows a clear change of behavior based on his previous experience. Now that we know what memory is, how can we test it in plants? The most basic kind of memory comes from non-associative learning. That mainly means 2 things: sensitization and habituation. Sensitization happens when repeated strong exposure makes a response stronger. For example, after watching a scary movie, you might flinch at every little noise in your room. Habituation is the opposite. Repeated exposure to a harmless stimulus makes the response weaker. Like when someone who smells bad can notice their own odor anymore, because their nose has gotten used to it. Since sensitization is pretty hard to test in my home setup, I'll focus on habituation for this experiment. So now, how do we test habituation in plants? Since plants are naturally exposed to wind, I thought this would be a good stimulus to test if they indeed can become habituated. My idea is to take an open, unstimulated leaf and expose it to a strong wind current, strong enough to make the leaf close. Then, I keep the wind blowing for a prolonged amount of time until the leaf reopens, which might mean it has become habituated to this wind stimulus. To test whether the leaf is truly habituated, I would apply another strong wind stimulus and watch its response. If the leaf no longer closes, that suggests it has habituated to the wind. So now, we have our test subjects, and we have our experimental setup, so let's get started. To generate a strong and consistent wind stimulus, I used a powerful USB fan with 3 discrete power settings. This allowed me to precisely control the intensity and maintain consistency throughout the experiment. After setting everything up, I began the training. At the start, you can see a clear response to the airflow, particularly in the younger, more reactive leaves. They close rapidly when exposed to the strong current. I then kept the fan running until most of the leaves returned to their open, untriggered state. In this time-lapse, you can clearly observe the leaves gradually becoming less responsive to the wind. Over time, they appear to habituate to the stimulus. When I reintroduced the same wind stimulus, the response was noticeably reduced. To rule out effector fatigue, meaning a loss of function in the leaf movement mechanism, I applied the mechanical stimulus by tapping the leaves during the wind's exposure. As you can see, they still respond normally to touch, indicating that the reduced response is not due to mechanical exhaustion, but to stimulus-specific habituation, which is pretty cool. In habituation, once the stimulus stops, the response is expected to recover over time. This is called dishabituation. To test this, I left the plant undisturbed for 24 hours and then repeated the same wind experiment. As you can see, the leaves show a strong fast response again, similar to the initial reaction. This indicates that the plant recovered its sensitivity after the previous day's training. This first experiment already showed something quite remarkable. It seems that the shy plant is at least able to get habituated with a simple stimulus like the wind. This already shows a bit of a primitive memory situation going on here. But I wanted to go a bit further with this habituation setup, and I wanted to try a bit more of an aggressive stimulus, something a bit less natural, to see how well it can be generalized. For this, I decided to do a drop test, which I thought could be aggressive, and plants don't usually get dropped on the ground because the ground doesn't really move. So, yeah, that's what I decided to do. The setup is quite similar to the previous one, but instead of applying a constant, continuous stimulus like before, I would repeatedly drop the container to see whether the leaves would become habituated over time, and then test with a new drop test after the training session. The first drop was strong enough to make the plants react, not just the one that was actually being dropped, but also the other ones nearby. After that, I dropped the plant from about the same height several times. Gradually, the plants became less reactive, especially in the neighboring plants. This fits quite interesting with the idea of habituation, because a weaker and more harmless stimulus leads to a faster habituation, so it correlates quite well. In the final test, there are clear signs that some habituation took place, especially in the younger leaves. Younger leaves may be more adaptable, much like how younger people often learn or adjust faster than older individuals. One issue I had with this experiment was that sometimes the lower leaves brushed against the plastic rim during the drops, which added an extra stimulus to the experiment, something I should have avoided in hindsight. Still, I'm kind of done with habituation experiments. I think we've had enough, so let's start doing something a bit more interesting. I think you guys also want to do something a bit more interesting, right? For example, liking and subscribing. Do it. Do it now. It's super hot right now and I'm wearing this lab coat just for you. Please subscribe. Please. As opposed to the previous habituation experiments, which were part of non-associative learning, meaning they did not depend on the association between two different stimuli, associative learning, as the name suggests, is exactly that, the ability to predict based on a previous stimulus, which is a much more advanced form of learning and memory. A well-known example of this is Pavlov's dog experiment, where he was able to train a dog to salivate with a ring of a bell, simply by training the dog to associate it with food. This type of learning is known as classical conditioning. I really wanted to test this on my photosynthetic subjects, and so this is what I come up with. For my neutral stimulus, I decided to use a strong light to stimulate the leaves without triggering them. And then, for my strongly responsive stimulus, I decided to bump the leaves with some tweezers. After doing this training regimen for many cycles, if the leaves were indeed capable of making the association between the light and the physical stimulus, I should be able to make the leaves respond with just the light shining on them, without any physical touch. To give myself the best chance of actually training the leaf, I chose a large, healthy, young leaf, and then started shining the brightest flashlight I had on it. I kept the light on for about 15 seconds and then forcefully tapped the leaf with metal tweezers. In the time lapse, you can see me repeating this over and over as soon as the leaf opens again. By the end of the training session, something strange and unexpected started to happen. At first, the leaf front began moving away from the side where I was applying the stimulus, and then the whole leaf started shifting backwards, almost contorting itself and tucking the stimulated part out of the way. I had never seen this behavior before, and I only noticed it when I was reviewing the time lapse. This made me wonder if the leaf was in a way trying to run away from the training. It honestly made me feel surprisingly sad about hurting the plant in a way I didn't really expect to happen. I felt that was a much more a feeling of empathy rather than just attachment to an inanimate object. Anyway, after the training and letting it rest and return to normal, I finally moved on to the final test, to see whether the leaf had actually learned to associate the light with the physical stimulus.
Let's go! Woo! We did it. We did it, guys. We did it. What are you doing here?
Before celebrating, did you actually check the negative controls?
What exactly do you mean?
You know, the controls that tell you if your training actually changed the behavior based on the baseline.
I didn't, but it's probably
Or
not
not
going to
really.
make much of a difference.
Yeah, that's kind of important if you're trying to do experiments, scientifically speaking. So, yeah. So, as a control, I decided to stimulate an untrained leaf the same way as the previous one, as you can see here. So you can see that it clearly didn't react at all, like the other one, So by this point, I think I already tortured these plants long enough. Or so I thought. Because one day when I was checking on the plants, during the night cycle, I saw that they were completely closed. So this got me thinking, what if these plants could maybe be able to learn a sequence? Hear me out. These plants seem to exhibit nyctinasty, which is a fancy term for basically during the day the leaves open up and during the night they all close up. This seems to be like a circadian rhythm thing, because even when you keep the light on after their normal nighttime schedule, they still seem to close their leaves, as you can see here in the time lapse. And when I was checking this, I thought, what if I created a sequence of light days and dark days in a very specific way? Maybe I could be able to test if they could predict a sequence of differently lighted days. Here is the experimental setup that I was thinking. Based on the daily open and close movement of the leaves, I designed a weekly schedule with 2 consecutive 12-hour light days, followed by a 24-hour dark day. This pattern was repeated for 3 weeks. On the final 24-hour dark day, I would check whether the leaves were closed. If they were still open, that would suggest that the plant was simply following a normal circadian rhythm. But if the leaves were closed, it would indicate that the plant had anticipated the long dark period after the 2 normal light days. To test this sequence learning even further, I would leave the next day dark as well. Even though the pattern would normally predict a light day, if the plant had learned the sequence, the leaves should be more open than on the previous day, despite having experienced uninterrupted darkness up to that point. Here you can see how the plants looked on the first dark day. As you can probably tell, most of the leaves seem to be open, especially the older leaves. Which makes sense, I mean, that's kind of what we've been seeing time and time again. The older leaves really seem to maintain their behavior. They don't seem to be as plastic as younger leaves. And now, looking at the last expected dark day, meaning the last of the training, I picked a young but fully grown leaf to compare between today, the dark day, and the next day, which should be a light day. You can clearly see that it seems to be closed, or basically closed. Even though the older leaves, again, seem to be maybe slightly more closed than before, but they are essentially still open, as in the first dark day. Now, looking at the same leaf but in the next light day that was kept in the dark, you can see that it is clearly more open than in the previous day, which indeed suggests a higher expectation of light in this day than in the previous one. Isn't this quite interesting? I mean, it does seem to be a different expectation based on the day. So this cannot be just circadian rhythm. I mean, the footage was filmed on the same time, just 24 hours apart. So what can we take from this video? Well, the shy plant seems to habituate to harmless natural stimuli like the wind, especially in younger, healthier leaves, which is somewhat expected, but it's nice to verify it empirically. It wasn't really capable of associating, one stimulus to another. However, this could be maybe because the training wasn't long enough. So perhaps if I kept training it for longer and throughout more days, maybe the behavior would change more, the association, because the more you train, the bigger the link in one action to another. Or perhaps instead of looking at the binary response, meaning it stays open or it closes, maybe we should look into a more time-dependent response. So because the control shows us that it will react to the light eventually, so perhaps what actually changes is the time between the light and the response. So that could be another way of trying to track if there is training based on the physical attack. The runaway response that I got during the training, I mean, it really got me confused. I was wondering what actually caused it. So could it be the physical attack to the leaf? Because I was really, punching the leaf, let's say, very strongly, not lightly at all, really giving it a strong stimulus. Or maybe the light itself, because the light was quite strong and close to the leaf, maybe it was heating up the leaf and somewhat burning it. Could be a possibility. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you have maybe some explanation, or you think I'm just kind of seeing things and it was actually nothing that crazy. So on the last experiment where I tried to see if they could learn a sequence based on light and night cycles, it seems that they were able to anticipate the dark and light day accordingly, as you can see by the how open and how close the leaves were based on what they were supposed to expect. But the difference wasn't that dramatic. So maybe, again, it comes down to a longer training period. Maybe instead of less than a month, maybe I could do 2 or 3 months, and maybe then you could start seeing a dramatic shift in behavior. So this was quite fun for me to do and really quite interesting, but I'm not really the first person to ask or to investigate if plants could have cognitive abilities. There's actually a fair amount of research already published that goes into this same question. And a lot of the experiments that were already done in a more controlled and serious environment are very similar to the ones I've done in this video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave in the description some resources on these serious experiments and articles, and maybe you can learn something about them. So do plants actually have memory?